Whitecap is proudly supported by Sail Canada's BMO MasterCard. For every purchase made using the card, you win with no fees and cashback or air miles, and Canada's high-performance sailing programs get supported. This credit card is the card for Canadian sailors. Scan here to get yours today. Hey, welcome to Whitecap, the Canadian Sailing Podcast. I'm Dave Krypton, longtime dinghy sailor and passionate fan of the Canadian sailing scene. Today is episode 12, the season 1 finale. Very exciting, and to mark the occasion, I have my very first Olympic medalists. John Millen and Frank McLaughlin won the bronze medal in the Flying Dutchman class in 1988 in Busan, South Korea. Frank is a 3-time Olympian, including the 470 in 1984 with Martin Tenhove, and John is a 2-time Olympian in the FD with Frank. They were the 1981 world champions in the International 14 class, and in the FD they were also medaled in the European and World Championships. John was a trimmer as well on the crew of 2 Canadian challenges for the America's Cup. Finally, they were recently inducted into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. Frank and John, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
We usually start these out with a short answer section, and I can get you both to answer the questions like one after the other. Best store for sailing gear in Canada, past or present?
Oh, I mean, Folk Sales I'd have to go with.
Yeah,
Okay.
Folk Marine. Yeah.
Okay.
Folk Marine.
That's a very, very popular answer even to today. Your preferable scoring system, the old Olympic system or the present low point system?
I would say it depends on the fleet size. I think that when we used to sail in fleets of, 50, 60, 70 boats, I think the Olympic scoring system was a good one because it was a big difference. Being able to crack the top 10, you deserve to get bonus points. I think now the fleets are smaller, 30 or less, then perhaps the new system is better. But I think they're both good depending on the situation.
Right. What do you think, Frank?
I agree with that. I guess I have a nostalgic preference for the old Olympic scoring system, but I have to say it did make life very complicated when you're trying to figure out the combinations.
The best boats to learn to sail on?
I would say for us, the I-14, back in the good old days when they only had the single trapeze, and that you had a great mix of the boat handling, the agility, balance, as well as the strategic stuff, and also for us, there were so many good people to sail against. So it was a great place to learn all the fundamentals, everything.
Frank, do you remember when you first sailed an I-14? Like, how old were you?
Oh, well, my dad was a big I-14 sailor, so he was sort of like the Gordie Howe of I-14s.
Truly.
And Johnny actually got some of his early licks in with. Johnny had the misfortune of sailing with many, many, many hours, not only with me, my brother, but my dad.
Yeah.
So when Johnny, so he was probably, Johnny, you were probably like 13 or something when you were first touring for my dad, a bit, pretty young, but yeah, I would have been around that same age sailing the 14, but
Okay.
I was going to say the Opti. I mean, not so much for us because the Optis weren't really a big thing when we were that age, but I had at least my 2 sons who sailed a fair bit. I went through the Opti programs and I thought they were great. They were great little boats for, you could put like an 8-year-old in there and they could go out, 25 knots and get around a course and amazing how good some of those little kind of 8 to 13-year-old kids in those Optis.
So safe, right? Like if they dump, they just become a sea anchor essentially.
Yeah,
And,
I remember one time when my kids were doing it, we were down at Cork, and it was one of those days blowing 25, and all the fleets were brought back in, including the Optis, and then the Optis went back out and sailed the race, and they were the only fleet to go out. All these little kids in 25 knots, and nobody else could race, so that tells you something.
God, yeah. Favorite place you've ever sailed?
Oh, there's so many great places. It really depends. I mean, the one that maybe would stick out for me would be Lake Garda. We had so many great fun races, short tacking up the cliffs of Lake Garda, and it's such a beautiful spot. There's great breeze, and you get the Italian lifestyle when you're on shore. But that being said, I could go on and on, but there's so many other great places.
Also, a very popular answer among those sailors who have been around a bit. Frank?
Yeah. I just love Lake Garda, and Johnny and I had some really good regattas there. It's just such a beautiful place, and it's a sort of unique place as well. But I also agree that, and one of the beauties of our sport is the kind of amazing places you get to go and sail. And we had a great World Championship in Rio, and that is just a spectacular place to sail. New Zealand as well. I sailed lucky enough to sail in New Zealand a couple of times and loved it down there. But all kinds of places, Jesus, endless list, really.
I didn't love the Northern Kingston. Europe, so. I mean, Kingston, we've had some fantastic races and battles. Miami, Biscayne Bay, there again as well. Newport, there were a couple of great out on the ocean races. That one last race and that one World Championships where it was total survival. There's a lot of great spots.
You would go out pretty far in Newport?
Well, actually, what we did is that I think the first couple of races were actually inside, but the last day, for whatever reason, they put us outside, and it was actually an advantage for us because it was kind of hairy, big waves, big breeze, and we hadn't actually had the best start to the regatta, and so we were able to. I think we finished off on a pretty good note there on that last day, and I think that the waves and winds sort of helped us. Okay.
So, what about a boat from history that you would have liked to have sailed on?
Geez, I don't know. I always have a fascination with those really old Christopher Columbus style.
Oh yeah.
Ships, although there was a high death rate, I think, in those, so I'm not sure I really would have liked to sail in. But those, or something like the Blue Nose, where you're that same kind of concept, but a lot higher speed.
Right.
And being able to rip around the ocean.
John?
Yeah, I'd say Blue Nose, or there's one that, was it the Spirit of Baltimore? That would come by here, and I always loved it because it had great rake in the masts. It was like the masts were tilted way back, and I just thought it was great for one of the few kind of old boats that sort of had a modern touch to it. They always look cool with the mast rake back, yeah.
Do you ever wonder how those boats get upwind? But the old Spanish galleons or whatever. How did they?
Oh, I don't think they did. They just,
not very efficiently. No.
They just used the trade runs as like an escalator, and you hop on going one way, and you go away and get on the way back. But yeah, it must have been hell trying to. You look at some of the old pictures and footage of guys going around the Horn, and you think, oh man, that's just brutal. Yeah.
So this is an important question for double-handed sailors. Were you guys Frank and John or John and Frank?
I think we were Frankie and John. Yeah.
Okay. That's usually the way. It's usually the skipper gets their name first. So I did ask you guys if you could dig up your medals and show them on the screen.
You see that?
Oh, wow. That is really cool.
Here, I'll try to get it into the center of the picture. Yeah, so... Awesome. Oh yeah, it's a beauty. And then on the in the middle, on the edge there, I'll let you see it. They actually put the event on the edge, and then on the back, this was a symbol that Korea picked for the. And I guess at the time they were sort of a little concerned about North Korea. At the time, North Korea was making all this noise about potentially disrupting the event, and so I think as
Ooh. Did yours come in a fancy box like that too, John?
Yes, I have the box here. I can show you the box if you want.
No, that's okay. Wow. That's so
looks
cool.
good in the box, though, doesn't it?
It does.
What? But, John could put his on right now.
I could. Well, we could both put them on, I guess.
Oh, yeah, sure. Just for a second, maybe?
Easy to get it out of the box.
Yeah, I know. It's there you go. Hold on.
It's a mostly audio podcast, but the people that are watching this get an extra bonus there.
There you go.
Oh,
Just
cool.
flashing our medals around for people on audio.
Do you guys remember what it felt like to get those put on?
Whew.
Oh, yeah, it was a mix. It was incredible sensation of satisfaction and accomplishment, mixed with emotional and physical exhaustion and relief. Yeah, you're talking about it now. Hairs on the back of my neck are standing up on end, and I'm getting goosebumps because it was just like a magical. It was unbelievable. Yeah, words
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, I think that captures it pretty well. I think both when we crossed the finish line in the last race and we realized we'd won the medal and also getting the medal, the sort of sense of accomplishment and, you know, as you can imagine, for most people, and I don't know if ours was more than other people or not, but a lot of miles in trials and tribulations and heartbreaks and disappointments and near misses and all that just washes over you all in one big wave, and you realize, geez, we actually did it. Here we are. It's an amazing feeling.
Wow.
It was definitely a once in a lifetime kind of feeling.
Do you think, like John, you mentioned exhaustion, do you think, was there an element of relief?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we went into the race in 5th place, and it was tough because we'd been, I think, first to the weather mark, I think, in 3 of the previous 6 races. And so we'd won one of them, but the other 2 we hadn't. And so, and it's the one challenge with the good and the bad about our series was only 1 race a day, but you get to dwell on all the good and the bad throughout the series. And it's going into the night of the last race, I couldn't sleep. I'm thinking, geez, we should be, here we are, we're struggling. It's going to be a huge task just to get a medal, and you think of all the opportunities we had to be higher up or even be guaranteed one, and it's so. And as Frank mentioned, you think, oh, we had such a great. We don't want to blow this opportunity, so
right.
Sure, it was so great to deliver on the last day, and
well, I do want to get into that race specifically, but I watched the Hall of Fame speeches. Which, Frank, you said that you came in 12th in one race due to a really strange thing. I wonder if you're able to elaborate on that.
Ooh, yeah, I can painfully elaborate on that. But I mean, let me just set the stage for it because I think it was, can't remember, Johnny, you might remember if it was the 4th or 5th race, but it might have been the 4th race. But we had, first 2 races, we had 2 pretty good, keepers, like something like a 5th and a 4th or something like that, or a 3rd. And the 3rd race, on the 3rd day, we won. We led to the weather mark. We led all the way around. We won the race. So we were like right in the hunt. Like we were second probably going into the next day. And the next day, it's probably a little windier than the last day. And we were, important fact, we were super fast downwind in those windy, wavy conditions. So if we got around the weather mark first in a good breeze in the waves, we were going to be tough to catch. So the 4th race was the one where something happened. We got around the weather mark first. The weather leg was almost a carbon copy of the day before, and we got to the mark first. We went around. We had a nice little lead for, maybe a 50-yard lead. And I went to hoist the spinnaker, and we went through our usual routine, and the spinnaker wouldn't go up. And there was a knot in the spinnaker halyard.
Oh, my God.
The size of my fist. I'm not kidding. Now, it was crazy, really crazy, windy, big, huge waves. So I guess what happened was it was sloshing around the bottom. It somehow tied itself into this huge knot. So Johnny had to come in. So I'm like, I see it, and I'm go, Johnny, you gotta come in and get this. And so John had to come in instead of going out on the trapeze. And in those days that we were, we'd been going down the first reach. He had to come in, sit on the boat, and take 2 hands, because I was steering, so I had to hold onto the tiller, take 2 hands to undo this massive knot. And as he was undoing this massive knot, guys were flying by us with their spinnakers on. And by the time we got that fixed, we were in the bottom third of the fleet. And so, it was just like slit your wrist material. It was just unbelievable. And I don't know, we came we might have come. We might have come. I don't know. Maybe we did come 12th that race, but it was one of our. The irony is the two bad races we had there, a 12th and a ninth. The one I'm just describing, we were first around the other weather mark. The other one, we were second around the weather mark, and there was a big freakish wind shift, and the whole fleet inverted, and we went from second to like deep, and then battled back and came ninth. So I mean, just with normal activity, I mean, we could have won that regatta. We sailed well enough to win that regatta, like for sure.
So you're going into the last race in fifth. I did want to ask you about that knot. So where was it? Was it like between the head of the spinnaker and the mast?
It was in the boat. So we had a continuous spinnaker halyard. So the spinnaker came down into like a big long chute through the front, through the bow of the boat, and then it was in a chute. So I would stand up in the back of the boat and hoist it, and it was continuous line that would go out the chute and was attached to the middle of the spinnaker. So when we doused, I would pull the opposite direction and it would come back in down through the chute. So it meant that there was line running from the end of the chute in the boat to the back to the transom, through a block, through another block, and then up going towards the mast where the halyard was. So it was in the bottom of the boat. So I think what happened was it had sloshed around, and it was sloshing around with all the crazy waves, which were insane, a whole other topic. You know, one silver lining I will say, because I always think back at that, and I told you about, I mentioned the other race where we were second around the weather mark, and that went upside down too. I mean, that was so psychologically stressful just to keep going in the regatta and say, you know, okay, next day, tomorrow, we're just going to go out and we're just going to try and sail our best race. And, you know, it'd be easy to blow our brains out because of the incredible bad luck we had. And I think it's one of the things I'm the most proud of, actually. And, you know, we needed every ounce of Johnny and I being super close friends and being teammates for a long time to be able to just do that and just keep our chins up. And then the way we came through winning the last race in really insane conditions. I mean, I think that's a big part of why we were so emotional that we pulled it off, you know, at the end of it, because it could have easily been the world's harshest denial for us if we come fourth or fifth in that regatta after the luck we had. So,
what do you remember, John, about that knot in the spinnaker halyard?
I just remember, you know, you go through your normal routine. I'm sort of waiting for that spinnaker to go up for me to get on that trapeze and get going, and it's just like, oh, there's an issue. And I look back, and yeah, there's this massive knot, and of course, I think in the eagerness for Frank to get the halyard up, it had been pulled really tight, and so it's just, oh shit, and it's like, oh baby, yeah, and it's just to try to get it organized, and it's tough because you're distracted. Boats are, you know, the conditions are very. You're distracted for a lot of reasons. One, you're just trying to keep the boat flat because the waves are so steep, and even though you don't have the spinnaker up, you could easily, you know, you lose control. And then there's guys who are going past you, and it's like, oh, you're trying to not get distracted by that, and just try to deal with it.
Right. I had forgotten that the FD has a launcher essentially, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot of, you know, you have a retrieval line and everything, so it's a whole, yeah, it makes sense now. And so going to the last day, then you're in fifth, right? Can you tell me the story of the last race?
Yeah. So, got it. You know, for all the grimness of that bit about the knot, there's a beautiful part of this story that you know, I think the gods shone on us a little on that in that last day. But so it was windy again. It was like the place was. I should just describe it. It was on the Sea of Japan, right? So if Korea's shaped like Florida, and we sailed out of Busan, which is the equivalent of where Miami is in Florida, so down at the bottom tip. But, you know, there's only about, I think, 20 miles across, and then you've got Japan there. And what happens is there's a huge amount of water that's funneling through basically this giant channel. And when it was windy there, the wind tended to blow the opposite direction that the current was going. So you got these incredibly monster steep waves that were insane. Like they'd knock knock you right off the trapeze, and they'd crash into the boat on you, and like it really was survival. Anyway, so the wind came up in this last race, and it was, by the time we started, it was probably 20 knots. Pretty big wind, pretty big waves, and we got a pretty good start, and we sailed a pretty good first beat, and I think we went around the weather mark first. Sorry, fifth or sixth actually. And a couple of the guys we had to beat, including the German Batzel, multi-world champion, were ahead of us. He was winning the race. And so we start going down this reach, and it's an incredibly tight reach. And we rolled over top of our British friends, who were our training partners. And we were just screaming along. And then fortunately, we were pretty diligent about always doing compass calculations for where the marks should be, right? So we knew the compass direction to the weather mark, and we always calculated where the jibe mark should be. And we got about a third of the way, maybe down the leg, and we were now in, fourth or fifth. And we started having a very animated conversation about the fact that, geez, we're going at an awfully high angle, and there was a mark up there, so you could sort of see this mark where people were going, but we were thinking, that can't be the right mark. It's like 30 degrees high of where it should be. But the whole fleet's going for it, right? And it's the last damn race of the Olympics, and you're trying to win a medal, so you don't want to make a mistake. And we've been known to make mistakes about which mark to go to before. And anyway, Johnny's on the wire, and he, I can't remember if you came into the boat and looked, but we were thinking that, like, we were basically had persuaded ourselves the jibe mark should be 30 degrees lower where everyone is going. And then I think, if I remember this correctly, Johnny, I think Johnny saw it. I think Johnny looked down there and said, "There's a mark down there." And so, there was a few seconds of grim hesitation, and then we were like, "Okay, we're going for it." So we were the first guys to peel off. In a tight reach, everybody's in a line, right?
Yeah.
And here's where the gods shone on us. This was actually quite amazing. I would give major parts of my anatomy to have a video of this. Because at the moment we bore off to shoot down to go towards where we figured out the mark must be, we got on this monster wave. Like, we bore off, and for about the first, it seemed like forever, but it was probably about a minute. And when you got on a wave in those waves, it was like being on a surfboard on a big wave in Hawaii. Like the sail, even though it was blowing 20, 25, the sails would just go limp, and we'd both be in the boat. And I'm just steering to try to ride the wave for as long as possible, keep the boat upright. But you're absolutely smoking, because you're just smoking down this wave. So we rode this wave. So we didn't look around. We couldn't look around or anything, right? We just made the decision. We bore off. All of a sudden, we're on this massive wave. So we're just riding the wave, and I'm thinking, let's ride this baby for all it's worth. And so after whatever amount of time it was, we finally came off the wave and stabilized and filled the sails. And I look back, and everybody had borne off to follow us, and we were leading the race by 100 yards.
Oh, wow.
Like, so we instantly went from like fourth or fifth to first, and we did the right thing because we were going for the right mark. And I tell you, that was an unbelievable.
Well,
I don't know if the gods shone upon you, or if I don't know if the gods shone upon you, or the eyesight of John Millen shone upon you for that one.
It was sort of funny because the waves. Frank said the waves are so big. The big issue we had, Dave, was that a lot of the times they were those old Rothmans marks, the tall cylinders, and they're the big.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, no problem, they're like 8 feet tall. You should be able to see them. But the waves are like 10, 12 feet high, and so unless you and the mark are both on the wave top, you can't see it. And we had got a bit of a righty going into the first mark. And so everyone sort of sets up, well, this is what the normal angle is. And they were all going too high. And so we're going along. I'm saying, this isn't right. And yeah, I'm sort of looking around. And luckily enough, we happened to be on top of a wave when the mark was. I could see it. And I'm pointing at it. And then, you're trying to do the math on our compasses. And back then, and, it's those compasses with the dial is moving all around.
Yeah,
but it seemed to be roughly in the right spot, and that's what I was trying to convince Frank. I said, I think this is the right spot. And Batzel was going for some mark that looked to be way off on the horizon. It just didn't look right. So,
yeah. I do remember. I do remember. I mean, it was a joint decision. Obviously, they were going to peel out of this race and go down. But I do remember Johnny uh, concluded that, like he said, I think he said, "Well, that's the mark. We got to go for it." And I was, gotta admit, I was scared to peel out of the race because if we were wrong, we were dead, right?
Yeah.
So we'd never get back in the race. But thankfully, we were we were right.
That's an
And
incredible story. That like because that happens to people all the time, right? You can't see the mark, someone's going to the wrong mark, but here you are. It's the last race of the Olympics, like you said, and like the, just the conviction. Was it more like, okay, I'm sure this is where the mark is, or was it an idea like this is actually going to get us? This is a risky maneuver that will get us ahead, or was it more like you really thought that's where it
And
was?
once you could see it, it was the Rothman's marks we'd been, or whatever, the large cylindrical marks we'd been going to all regatta, and it would happen to be in the vicinity, and so it was the logical mark to be for us to sail to. So it was like, unless you can see something else, that was and we couldn't, and God
Right.
knows we were looking around trying to find something. It was
yeah,
it was sort of it had to be it. Yeah.
But it's
yeah,
like
I
Frank
think
said, it's kind of a risky, to bear it, like you said, to peel off and be the first boat to peel off
Yeah.
is
well, it was a
sort of risky.
gutsy move, man. Let me tell you, that was gutsy. But
We
as I
had pace
recall
going
it,
at, yeah. I mean, we got.
we had
We had
we
that wave, but we just got into a groove the rest of the way. We were smoking, yeah. And it was like,
yeah.
we got to that jibe mark, and it was like and everyone's coming with us. And so once everyone started coming with us, we knew we were on. And at that point, it was just, oh, this is keep the boat upright and get to the finish.
Right.
Which was easier said than done. As like the rest of that race had a lot of drama in it as well. And the other thing that's kind of important to know is, harkening back to the discussion about Olympic scoring, is there were all these complicated combinations because of the different points if you came first, second, third, fourth, etc. And we had like three other guys to worry about, three other boats to worry about. But the one way we knew we'd win the medal is if we came first, and we got 0 points. So as soon as we got down to that jibe mark and we went around, we're like, okay, we just have to stay in first place, and we're going to win the medal. And then there was, another one, two, three, four legs of just, white knuckle trying to keep the lead, and we had some guys catch up to us. And I mean, I think going around the last, I think we went down the run. We ended up leading all the way, and we held on and won.
Okay.
But we went down the run, and I think we were a little too, we kind of clamped it down a bit because we didn't. The closer we got to the finish, the less we wanted to capsize. And a few guys, including the Norwegians, who were super fast, they won the silver medal. They caught up to us. We kind of threw away some of our lead because we were being a little too careful on the run. And then when we went around the leeward mark for the last beat, the wind we got hit by a puff that was probably 35 knots. I remember this so well because we're like, okay, we just got to go up this beat and cover these guys and win the race. And now we're turned and we're going upwind, and the puff is so big that we're ragging both the main and the jib, and we're not even really going forward because it's so windy. And I'm like, God, just turn us down to 30 knots. Please just let us sail upwind to the finish line. And so the puff went through and it came back down to like 25 to 30. But the Norwegian guy was like right on our heels, and we actually had a bit of a duel with him. And he kind of passed us at one point, and we basically caught a shift and got our lead back, and beat him, but I probably only beat him by about 5 boat lengths after all that.
Wow.
But I tell you,
Jeez.
that was an awfully good feeling to hear that gun go off.
It's the courses were quite long then too, right? So it was a mile beat. So how long was a race then?
No, 2 mile beats.
2 mile beats. Wow.
2.1.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's why they needed the large marks, because you couldn't. You started the race, you couldn't. Unless it was flat water, you couldn't see them. It's just they're way up. They're way up there. But the FDs, I mean, they're fast. It's It's, a long. They were fast boats. We would boot it, upwind. They would go very fast upwind. I mean, they were one of the. I guess they'd plane along, and we would go. We'd cover a lot of ground quickly. I mean, obviously, compared to the modern skiffs, it's not quite the same, but they did all right upwind.
Right. That's So just tell me about that feeling when you crossed the finish line then, and you heard the gun.
Well, it's kind of a funny story because, you know, I think it just hit like this wave of emotion because it was such a battle. Like we literally, like the Norwegians, there was one point where we split tacks and we came back, and if we kept going, they were going to cross us. So we tacked back because they had caught a shift. So we tacked back onto the shift, and then fortunately for us, it shifted back our way, and then we were ahead of them again. But you know, it was a battle right to the finish, and so I'm gonna get emotional. But when we crossed the line, you know, it just went over you with like this wave of emotion, like, holy Christ, we did it, we did it. And I thought it would be a good idea once we sort of cleared the finish line to stand up and do a backflip off the boat because I guess I'd always imagined doing that. And then after I did that, I handed the tiller to Johnny and said, and I did a backflip off the boat. And then I realized that, oh, well, now here I am in the water and it's blowing 30. And
I'm by myself in the boat trying to figure out how to get him back.
Johnny's in the boat by himself now and has to figure out how to get me back in. But he managed to do that.
Yeah,
Oh, excellent.
Live to tell the tale.
truly.
Jeez.
It was an exciting day. And my dad and my eldest sister, Madeline, were both there. So, you know, my dad having sailed in 2 Olympics and having watched my brother win a medal in LA 4 years before, I don't think I ever really appreciated till I got to be a parent myself and, you know, watched my kids compete in various things. You know, what an amazing thing that would have been for him, just to be there for that.
Well, geez, that could be an episode right there. That the story of that last race. Because I heard you tell the story at the ceremony about the big wave, but the fact that you had to decide whether to peel off from the tight reach was a whole other.
Oh yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, that was something. That was something.
So, speaking about the '88 Olympics, I did want to ask you guys about the famous Larry Lemieux story, where he saved the South Korean sailors, and just to get a different perspective, what do you guys remember about that?
Oh, you know, I think the thing about it was that it was sort of a very funny time for the whole Canadian Olympic team because, I mean, days before, Ben Johnson had tested positive for steroids. And so, you know, at the time, you know, the whole Canadian team, all of a sudden, you know, you have this stigma. So, you know, it was one of those things where, boy, the team could really use a bit of good news or good PR. And so, and I think for Larry, you know, I guess he happened to be there in the right spot at the right time, and he was able to help those sailors. But I think for him too, it helped his regatta because I don't think the regatta had been going as well as he'd wanted it to be, and so it was sort of a good little sort of byproduct, something he could feel happy about, and you know, I'm sure to this day he's pretty proud of from that regatta. You know, he didn't get the result he wanted, but he was able to have something else which is arguably somewhat memorable as well.
For sure. The thing for me, like as you know, from a modern day perspective, like it's hard to imagine a situation like that now with so many coach boats around and so, you know, like, can you imagine?
The conditions there, the funny thing is, maybe you hear about it anecdotally, but the conditions were really crazy. I mean, they're, the Irish FD guys before one of the races, they pitch poled in a wave, they broke their mast. There was a bunch of stars breaking masts. There again, they were, what would happen is that the jib and the pole for the jib would hit the water, and it would basically buckle the mast. There was a lot of significant, serious breakdowns. It wasn't just capsize, get up, and keep going. And I mean, there's a short clip somewhere of Nigel and Gordy McEwan, and you can see they're just sailing along, and literally the wave just lifts up the boat and slams it on its side. And it's, I mean, it really was atypical sailing conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was extreme. And the other thing was, that the South Koreans didn't have a lot of experience running these kinds of major regattas, and I think they were under kind of staffed and under experienced for not only trying to run an Olympic sailing regatta, but trying to run it in insane survival conditions. So you know, it was a little bit. I mean, I've said this over and over again, and I don't think there'll ever be a sailing Olympics that where the conditions were that extreme, because that was extreme as you would ever sail in, period, let alone at the Olympics. And unless somebody decides to go back there, it's a pretty unique place in terms of that whole current. It was really insanely, dangerous actually. And the thing for us is we knew that was going to be the case, or there was a really good chance that it was going to be like that. So we did our best to go to places we could find where we could find reasonably gnarly conditions like that with really big waves. So we spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours training in those or the closest we could find, big waves, windy. And I have to say, I don't think we ever even came close to capsizing. We had a couple good capsizes in our Olympic run, including leading a race in the damn World Championship on that damn dike in Holland, the Isomere, where we capsized going into the leeward mark. But we got that, we really, really trained ourselves to the point where we had our systems down, where we reduced our risk, downwind especially. We changed a few things about the way we did things to make it a little safer. And some of the top competitors at some point capsized during that regatta.
Right.
And I don't remember us ever even being close to capsizing. I mean, we were paranoid about it a lot of times, but I mean, our training, we were in good shape. We were not afraid of racing in those conditions. We were ready to go.
Right.
That
That's
paid
cool.
off. Yeah.
In terms of sailing Flying Dutchman, right? I've never sailed one. I race lasers still. I race laser 2s, 420s, Hobie 16s, A-class catamarans. But there doesn't seem to be a boat like that. A 20-foot long, high performance trapeze boat. Like, I guess it's sort of like a 5.0. But tell me what it's like to sail a Flying Dutchman.
Well, I'll go first. I'll let Johnny speak to it. But honestly, they're amazing boats, and the combination of the sort of speed and maneuverability and the amount of stuff you could control. Like we had the ability to change the whole rig as we were sailing along, right? Adjustable shrouds, adjustable jib halyard, adjustable mast bend on the lowers. We could change everything. We could change the dial as we were racing. And there aren't really any. I don't know that there were any other boats like that in the Olympics at the time. And they were fast and fun, reasonably stable for a boat of that description. But we could also tack them like we had a continuous trapeze, where Johnny could whip across the boat and get out on the trapeze on the other side. We could tack them very quickly and not lose much speed. So they were extremely tactical as well. So I mean, a really unique combination of all those things. I think they were just an absolutely fantastic double-handed boat. It was a real shame. It's evolution, I guess, but it was tough to see that boat come out of the Olympics because it was really a special boat. Johnny?
Yeah. I mean, for one, you could have bigger people, right? I mean, all the guys in the 470 class were starving themselves, and we'd go out for dinner and have a big meal, and the poor guys are having salads for dinner. And I liked how everything was adjustable, and they were always tactical and strategic to sail, whether it was 5 knots or 25 knots. And yeah, they were really great. I mean, for us, we with the wind you get really heavy wind, big sea conditions, and the boats are seaworthy, and so you could really push them.
Right. Gosh. There's a bunch of things that are coming up in this story that I never want to be the guy who says, oh, it was better back in our day. But there are certain things like the triangle course on a trapeze double-handed boat is so exciting, especially for the crew. Like that jibe mark becomes like the most, I just remember sailing a course so many times. Yeah.
If the thing is, the courses would get long enough that if you had, say, pumping surfing conditions, it could be really tactical. And some people, what we would do is a lot of the times we were able to work low of the pack, and you'd have a lot of guys who would go high early and then have to pay coming down slower. And we could really work the low course and then get boy room at the jibe, and or when if it was really honking, just the guys who had to think, who double clutched instead of going for it right away. And
Yep.
there was a race at the Cadiz Worlds where, I think our jib broke before the start, and we got to the weather mark in the mid 30s, but it was really blowing. It was like 25 knots, 30 knots, and a lot of the people were kind of a little afraid or hesitant to put the spinnaker up. We went for it right away, and guys were capsizing at the jibe mark, and Frank was doing a great job of threading the needle, slaloming around the upside down or sideways FDs. And I think we got down to the leeward mark. We went from like 35th to 17th at the bottom. We were just picking up guys like crazy.
What kind of fleets, like how many FDs would you, or even all the Olympic classes in Canada when you had a trials, like how many boats, for example, in 84 for the 470s, how many boats were at the Canadian trials?
Well, we never had I don't think we ever had closed trials for our. So we always invited, whoever wanted to show up.
Oh, okay.
So, but there was always only really a handful of boats that were, in the Canadian trials that had any kind of a chance. So it was, often it would be maybe just three, but 3 to 5, I would say in the 470, maybe 3 to 6. But it would end up being a 20 or 25 boat regatta most of the time. Although sometimes we did American events too, like in Miami, or I know in the 470 we had a regatta in Newport Beach, California, and so that I don't remember, but I would guess that fleet was probably more like 50 boats.
Mm-hmm.
And
what about, go ahead.
that was always a little weird dealing with those different, and having a lot of Americans around when you're doing your trials. But the FD was similar, although slightly smaller fleets. So like the U.S., there were less FDs than 470s for sure. So at Cork, when we had the Olympic trials at Cork, I don't know, we might only had like 15 boats or something.
Right.
The one trial regatta Johnny likes to talk about, which is a nice memory, is we had a regatta in Kingston that was part of our trials where we had straight firsts. I think we had 0 points at the end of the regatta, even though all the top Americans were there. But it was probably it could have been like 14, 15 boat fleet.
Okay. That's, what they call it these days, like if you get all firsts, the kids call it having a picket fence.
Right.
This expression.
Yeah.
So, it was way cooler to have 0 points at the end of regatta, though. That's
Yeah,
much
that's
more
pretty
of a
cool.
flex. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Um,
It was also the first regatta of the Olympic trials, and so it couldn't have started better. So it was yeah.
But I don't want to get anyone to get the wrong impression about FDs. As soon as you cross the Atlantic, we were into 80, 90 boat fleets all the time, right? Or
Yeah.
any world championship, any major regatta, it was big fleets. And Johnny and I had a lot of history, but the time I spent in the 470, I think was really valuable because it just, for me, being a kid from Toronto, like going over to Europe and sailing, and we got our butts handed to us, especially at the beginning, going and sailing in 80 and 90 boat fleets that were so competitive. Oh my God, incredibly competitive. You could find yourself in the 40s and 50s really easily in those fleets. So I learned a lot of the hard way about how to sort of try to manage the big fleets. And that, I think, so by the time Johnny and I got together in the FD, we were in, we had all our international 14 sailing and our sailing as kids together. That was, so we were already a really good team. And then I had all the school of hard knocks with sailing the 470 for 4 years in those big fleets. So we were actually, we entered the FD as new FD sailors, but within a sort of season, we were consistently in the top 5 in most of the international regattas.
right. There was I think maybe I've gotten like so far off track. I didn't even get into kind of how you started out sailing. Like, can you guys take me through your story of, like, let's say, first time sailing through to when you started sailing together in the I-14s?
Yeah, we
John,
both
yeah.
went to RCYC Junior Club together. And so, of course, what would happen is that the logical step would be you do the 13 and under and 16 and under races. And we started doing that and having a lot of success at that. And you know, and it just sort of went from there. So I think we did regattas. We were doing well in those sort of things. We actually went to the youth championships when we were both this 15, and I guess it was 19 and unders back then, and we did reasonably well there. But the big challenge we had was that I was too heavy for a lot of the boats. That the combination of the two of us would be too heavy for 420s and 470s, and those were the boats we sort of would have to race in.
And Frank, I think I saw in that in the speech you said that you never felt like you had, even though you're coming from a very competitive, Olympic class dad and so forth, you never felt the pressure to be a competitive sailor. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. My mother was a really good sailor as well. She sailed international 14s. And my dad was a real beauty, I have to say. A real kind of just guy who loved to sail. He was a great sailor. He sailed in the Olympics twice. And he was, when I was growing up, and Johnny and I were youngsters at the yacht club, he was sailing the International 14, and it was right off the old dinghy docks at the RCYC. It was a really robust group of people sailing the 14. And I don't remember ever, I don't think I experienced really any pressure at all to sail. I think Terry was, my older brother, was about almost 4 years older than me. He was really, really good, really early too, which caused me to want to do it even less. But then we went to junior club, and I went to the junior club and I started sailing, and I just realized I loved it and I was good at it for whatever reason, genetics or whatever. I felt like I had a bit of a knack for it, and I liked it. So I just did it that way. But I don't feel like I ever got really pressured at all to do it, which was probably a positive thing.
Definitely.
And as Johnny said, he and I think were sailing together double-handed when we were 12. And so we sailed in the 13 and unders, and we sailed in the 16 and unders. And then I managed to, I sailed in what was then the 19 and unders, but Johnny was too big for the 420 and the boats we sailed. So I managed to go to the 3 World Youth Championships in a row in the double-handed, but all with different crew.
Who were the other people you sailed with for that?
So a fellow named Tom Cumming, who was a guy from our club. His older brother Andy was a really good sailor, still sails Atchels. And then I sailed with a young woman named Allison Burry in my 3rd year. So I sailed with 2 different crews. And then, so Johnny and I's experience was sort of having these separations because John was too big for various boats at certain times. So then after I did that world youth stuff, we then did our International 14 campaign, if I can call it that. So in which we got to sail against really excellent level, high quality competition, which was really good for our development. And then we won that world championship in 1981 in Annapolis. And so we kind of kind of proved to ourselves that, hey, we can do well against some of the best talent around. We should keep going.
It's interesting, the I-14, John, if you want to talk about it, because it's not certainly now, I know there's still a fleet in Toronto, but growing up on the East Coast, and so nobody was sailing I-14s in Nova Scotia, and I don't know if they were big out west either. So it's a very Toronto or Ontario centric kind of thing, but a lot of great sailors came through that fleet.
Yeah, I think the appeal was that the boats were made in Montreal, performance sailcraft. You could you had wooden ones, but glass ones, and so there was a huge. And I guess at the time it was unlike now. It was all kind of much simpler, if you will, and much more accessible and affordable. And so you'd get fleets of like 60 boats at the Canadian Dinghy Association regatta, like the annual sort of Canadian Championship. And RCYC, the dinghy dock, you'd have, there's 20 boats at the club, and you'd get like 15 to 17 out for a midweek race. And And for me, obviously one of the things that I was able to benefit from was you always ended up crewing for different people. When I was little, if I wasn't sailing with Frank's father, there'd be someone else I'd get a ride with, and they may not have been as skilled or as knowledgeable, but you always get a different perspective. And I found, sailing with some various people, you end up learning a lot over time. But yeah, the 14s are great. There again, it's sort of like not quite as, they're very similar to an FD, same main size, but way bigger spinnaker, way tippier. And you could have, there again, really good tactical, strategic one-on-one battles with people. And there again, it was really good for working on your survival skills when it was windy.
Uh-huh. That makes sense now. This idea that they were made in Canada and they were like relatively easy to get and easy to buy.
Yeah, there was an open development class, and at the time, the development that was going on was sort of more measured, and it didn't get quite as extreme as it has now. I mean, the boats are that basically have converted into skiffs, and they're all carbon, and there's no question the performance is a huge magnitude of what they had, but it's just put it out of the reach for a lot of people. Just the cost to be there and be competitive it's not really set up for the weekend sailor like it was back in the day.
So in your speeches at the for the Hall of Fame induction, you both talked about family, and you both got choked up talking about family, which we could go. There's a lot to talk about there. The first thing I want to ask, though, is that I did ask when I had Ali and Mariah on which boat they would like to race Martin and John in. Not one of your classes, like not an FD or a 49er or 470, and which if you were going to sail, you and Martin were going to sail against your daughters, what kind of boat would you want to race them in?
Well, certainly not a 49er, but as long as it didn't involve a lot of crazy trapezing or hiking, I'd say anything.
Okay.
I think we'd be very competitive.
Excellent. Well, the interesting thing, they said that a VX1 would be good. So, and they both mentioned Frank. They were both, well, both of our fathers sailed with, with Frank McLaughlin. So, so I think we could put a thing together, maybe with the three of them and you guys and Marty, and do a VX1 match racing series and raise money for them.
That'd be hilarious. That's a great idea.
Really.
Great idea.
So Frank, your brother Terry is certainly one of the most celebrated sailors in Canadian history, who incidentally I got to race against once in 1990 in a match racing event in Oakville. We had Gord McLaughlin, actually, that you mentioned before, on our J24 racing, and Terry was there, and Ross McDonald was there, and it was a cool event for us. We were sailing for New Brunswick, and then they were the Ontario boat and the BC boat, and it's certainly actually one of the highlights of I got two trophies on the wall. One is the 13 and under cadet championships in 1982, and the other is the 1990 semifinalists from the match racing regatta where we raced against Ross McDonald and Terry McLaughlin. Very exciting. So, because this is really all about me, this podcast.
Yeah, of course.
But you talked in your speech again about the kind of progression, and Frank, and how you Terry was selling the FD, and then when you switched and you went from the 470 to the FD, did you actually take Terry's boat?
No, I don't think so. No, we didn't. Yeah, it's just funny how things work. It's funny how things work out. I think he did 2 cycles in the FD, and I guess felt that it was time to move on. I'd done a cycle in the 470, and I was too big really to be a helmsman in the 470. I was starving myself to try to even be, borderline small, light enough for the 470. Martin and I were like just always at the high end weight wise. So it was, I wasn't going to keep doing that after 84. And Johnny and I were a natural. Johnny and I in the FD was a really natural thing. We were actually like a perfect size for it. So it was calling our names, and we were going to do that regardless. And fortunately, Terry moved on, because it would have been pretty nasty, I think, if we didn't always get along the best as it was, and we have sailed against each other enough times, but, sailing against each other when the stakes were down for an Olympic berth, I think would have been more intense than probably either of us or our parents would have, or our other family members would have wanted to witness. So luckily that worked out.
All right, I'll leave it there. You did say in that speech that the only time that we were on the same page as far as sailing was concerned, between you and Terry.
Yeah, maybe a bit of an overstatement, but I think what's interesting is, I mean, he and I are obviously very similar in many respects, and we come from the same gene pool, and we were very blessed we had both our parents were really talented sailors. But it's really interesting how I think anyway, because I always think if you looked at our family from the outside, your mother was a great sailor, your father was a great sailor, he sailed in the Olympics twice. Your older brother was a great sailor, he won an Olympic medal, went to the Olympics. Surely you all sat around the dining room table and talked strategy and how to go fast and all that stuff. And there was literally zero of that. Zero.
Really?
Zero. I'm not kidding. And nothing. I feel like I did, the level of the amount of instruction or pointers that I ever got from my dad or from my brother was very close to nothing. But especially with my brother was doing well, so that was an inspiration in some respects to try to be competitive. But my dad just loved it so much, right? So he kind of just led by example in the sense that here's a guy who was, in his 50s at the time, probably getting into his 60s, still going out there and thrashing around in his 14, just loved it. It was clearly the thing he liked to do the most by far. And so that was infectious. And I didn't need any more than that. I was either going to like it or I wasn't going to like it. And the chances of me liking it, I think, were much greater in that environment. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
John,
happy that worked out.
yeah. You also got kind of choked up, John, in your speech regarding family. And I think there's lots of sports that have many generations that all come together. But I think sailing is pretty special that there's something for everyone. Like what does family and sailing mean to you, John, for example?
Yeah, well, my family we're all very passionate sailors as well. I mean, my dad wasn't nearly as successful as Frank's, but he really, really, really loved sailing. He had a 5.5 meter, which was an Olympic class back in the 60s, and he for him the highlight was racing on the Saturday in the club regattas, and then taking the family out sailing on the Sunday, and the midweek races on Tuesday nights. And he just really loved he loved the sailing. He loved the people at the club, and no question that sort of love of the sport sort of was absorbed by myself, and I guess to an extent my kids as well. My brother is a licensed ship captain who sails a lot and used to skipper charter boats, and so he still has a incredible love of the sport. And when he's not on ships, he's kiteboarding at some exotic location, so it's a funny thing. It does seem to be, as Frank mentioned, in the genes or something, that the love of the sport or whatever, it passes on. Yeah.
On that topic, I just think it's cool. The only real racing I do now is I have a J105, and we still have quite a good fleet at the RCYC. And Johnny's kind enough to sail with me on that, so it's just a blast to get out with your old buddy. But his son Liam, who's a very good sailor, does our front end of the boat.
Okay.
And his brother Mark comes out with us a fair bit, and we've had regattas where, Mariah has sailed a few times with us, but we've got three Millens, and maybe one of my sons or my daughter is out, and so we've got like 3 Millens, two McLaughlins, and a couple of our other crew on there, and it's pretty cool. That family element is huge, and our families have been really close. 3 generations really, because our parents were friends. Johnny and I, our generation. Johnny's also pretty close with my brother, and our kids are friends and close, and so and all sail at different levels.
I mean, I think that's
pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the ways the sport grows, right? There's a great book that I recommend to everyone called Saving Sailing, and it's specifically about that, about like what we can do to grow the sport. And one of the elements is the intergenerational part. Like if you have a kid and you just they're 8 years old, you dump them in an opti, and then they learn to sail an opti with a coach every day until they're 14, and then they get into a laser. And if you've never sailed, or you don't have not that everyone has the wherewithal, not that everyone can own a boat and go sailing and stuff, but if you can make some kind of intergenerational part of it, it'll definitely helps the sport.
Yeah, I think it's the love too, though, right? I mean, it's I think people can see the passion of the love of the sport, and that I think that passes on to your makes a big influence to your children or bringing other people on. And at the end of the day too, it's one of those things. Having a great group of people to sail with makes it that much more fun. And I would say that's the one thing where I've been really fortunate, that I've had all kinds of great people to sail with, and it's made it that much more fun. Whether I'm sailing with Frank or his brother, or there's all kinds of other people at the RC Weiss or elsewhere. It's fun to get out there and win, lose or draw. It's still just it is a social sport, and if you're with great people, it makes it it's kind of hard to beat.
Yeah. As I'm sure you guys know about the Sail GP program in Canada, which I think is fantastic. And they talk about it in a historical sense, like nothing like this has happened in Canada in so long, or sometimes they say it's nothing like this has ever happened in Canada. But in fact, we did have, as I'm going to put it, 2.5 America's Cup campaigns in the 80s that you were involved with, John. Can you tell me about your experience doing the America's Cup boats?
Yeah, I was like in my early 20s, and it was, needless to say, you're going from an international 14 to a 12 meter. You couldn't at the time think of things that further apart on the spectrum. I mean, there were I think the thing is that the 12 meters, they were sort of at the time like I'll call it, if I can, the Formula One of keel boats.
Yep.
Where it had all this custom work done, custom designs. But I think the difference between then and now is that the boats looked like sailboats. They were kind of the same as the kind of boats everyone sails, just a little more at the time, I guess, considered exotic, having novel things like Kevlar rope and trim tabs and I guess wing keels. I think that the challenge with the Sail GP is, like, there's no question the technology is off the charts and the boat speed's off the charts, but it's sort of, I think the challenge is that it's so much, although because it's off the charts, it's so much different than, you look at the Sail GP boats and you go to a yacht club and it's a little different. And so I'm not sure, and I guess the challenge is to get people who are interested in the Sail GP to be able to relate to the lower tech, if you will, of a typical sailboat you might see at a yacht club.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Frank, were you ever enticed, or was there any interest in doing the America's Cup stuff?
Not really, because I was going to university and trying to do, I think I was doing my 470 campaign while these guys were doing that Canada One campaign in the same years. I made a couple guest appearances. I think I steered a practice boat for a short period of time. Might have only been a weekend or a long weekend in Florida when they were in the west coast of Florida, and then I went and sailed. I can't remember the year, but we went in the 12 meter. They had a 12 meter world championship in Sardinia, hosted by the Aga Khan. Which I went and sailed on, and Terry was on the boat steering, and I think I was tactician, and John, you were there, right, for that? And it's just a cast of characters, some of those guys who were on that America's Cup boat, and I was friends with a lot of them, and man, we had fun. That was fun. And it was fun I think everybody liked fleet racing those boats, because all they ever did was match race, and, fleet racing is a lot of fun, so that was fun, but that was kind of the extent of my 12 meters. I didn't really do any of the America's Cup stuff.
The thing about the boats is that they're literally lead mines, right? They're like 55, 60,000 pounds. Everything was under incredible load, and the big issue we had. We were just worried about things breaking or being hurt by something that had broke. So, but at the time, it was sort of all the best sailors from the various countries were involved. So for me, it was just like, yeah, I just want to get a chance to be in be in their presence, race against them, and try to learn as much as I can.
Right. I mean, it's really like we had a boat in '83 and '87, which are historically significant, like in the history of sailing. Because '83 was when the Aussies first won after the longest, the longest winning streak in sports history, and then '87, the Americans won it back. So, I mean, like I say, historically, it's extremely significant. Were you involved, like, when the True North Canada 2 situation came together, John? Or how was you?
I was sort of doing sail trim for Canada 2 and the True North campaign, but Frank and I were also, we were cranking up. This was like 85, 86, so we were basically in the midst of our 88 Olympic campaign. So I wasn't actually in Santa Cruz when they did the boat-for-boat testing between Canada 2 and True North. I was off that summer with Frank. We were doing regattas in Europe, even in the winter of '86, Frank and I did the Worlds, and I guess January or February in Rio, and I sort of came back for a month or two. Then we went back off to Europe to do the Europeans, and back then what was called Yugoslavia. So I was definitely involved, but that was a funny. I mean, the funny thing about those programs is that the support was, there's a handful of people who are very supporting, but we were always struggling for resources, and they were always underfunded. It was a bit of a struggle.
Right. Frank, Terry was driving, he drove Canada 1. No, Terry Nielsen drove Canada 1, right?
No, Terry, my brother, drove Canada 1.
Canada 1, and then Terry Nielsen drove Canada 2. But Terry McLaughlin was driving True North? Is that what happened?
Yeah, but what happened is that there was two Canadian syndicates at the time, and to be honest, both of them were underfunded, and they really needed the merge. And so what happened is that neither one wanted to. One was sort of an East Coast challenge, one was a West Coast challenge, and I guess typical of Canada, you're going to have your own separate, but sort of economic pressures forced them to merge, and so the syndicate heads of both the challenges had to figure out who was going to lead it, and so. I wasn't party to that discussion, but at the end of the day, they decided to, I think what was a turning factor was we had a regatta in Oakland, in this channel in Oakland, but with us, Buddy Melgis, and Tom Blackhaller, and we won the regatta. And so it just so happened the Paul Phelan and the East Coast syndicate heads were out watching the regatta. And I guess the Perry Connolly and the West Coast guys effectively talked them into letting Terry Nielsen take control of the campaign. And so that's how they were merged. And, it was sort of an awkward situation because, they had to pick between the Terrys, and neither one was going to be comfortable working for the other. And so that's, it unfolded that way. But to be candid, I was somewhat removed from it because there again, I was sort of, to be candid, I was sort of primarily focused on what the Flying Dutchman campaign and what I could do with Frank. And so, and I realized it was whatever happened with the 12-meter syndicates, it was sort of beyond my control anyways.
Right. I got to have this conversation with Andy Roy about that whole thing.
Yeah, poor Andy. I mean, and there again, you have politics and America's Cup campaigns, and if you're not winning, people get teamed as the scapegoat. And Andy got turfed off the boat for no reason other than the design. The boat wasn't doing well, and the designer didn't want to take the blame, and he had to blame someone. So we're going to blame that guy, and off they go.
Oh, okay. I gotta ask, I guess, in terms of like, again, in the history, in 1984, Canada had 3 medals, and in 88 we had 1, 92 we had 1, and then Ross McDonald won the silver in 04, I think, in stars, and I think that's our last medal. So I guess the mid-80s are sort of a heyday. I know we had a lot of good chances for the 80 Olympics too, if it hadn't been, if we hadn't been boycotted. So what do you think has changed worldwide that Canadian boats are not? If we got 1 medal at the Olympics, we'd be having a downtown ticker tape parade in Canada right now. So what do you think has changed?
Well, Johnny's probably closer to it than I am, but I do think there's a sort of demographic. It's not quite this simple, but we were kind of I think we're kind of like tail end of the baby boom. I think you got to have a sort of a certain baseline number of really good sailors around you when you're developing, so you can always be pushed and have to get better and better. And I just think when I look across Canada now, it's just the ranks are thin, right? So you don't get I don't think there's anything that approximates what we had when we were young in terms of the quality and size of the fleets. And I think that generated people like me and John and my brother and Terry Nielsen and all the guys who came out of the lasers. And Ross is a bit of a tougher one to explain because he was out of Vancouver, but I think they had the same phenomenon there, just maybe not as kind of prolific as in Toronto. But so I think that's part of it. I think part of it is a demographic. We were just blessed with, and we had that, as I talked about at the induction thing. There were a lot of really good older, the generation, my father's generation, the Johnson sisters' parents, all these really good quality sailors in the FD that some of us could get some exposure to as well. So I just think there's a depth, we have a depth issue in Canada. And I think just because of demographics, we had a better environment back in those days than we do now. And I think a big part of the challenge is just that lack of depth. But what do you think, Johnny?
Yeah, yeah. I think the other advantage or the disadvantage that we don't have is that in Europe you have all these countries very close to each other, and so it's very easy to have people to sail against. And I think that was one of here it's a Canadian championship. It's not really practical, and the fleets, as Frank alluded to, are between us and the U.S. There's just not. It's really hard to get people into one place. Everything is a long drive. It's a really long drive to Florida. It's a very long drive from anywhere on the East Coast or the West Coast on Toronto or to Florida or even California. And so, whereas in Europe, all the various nations, you can get 20 nations sailing in somewhere like Holland and for a weekend regatta, no problem. And so I think that makes it difficult as well. It forces our sailors to have to travel all the way there to compete. And like New Zealand or Australia, where sailing is sort of a 12-month sport, it's much easier for them to sail all year round and there again build a critical mass domestically. But here it's it's a challenge.
Yeah, I would have to dovetailing on that a little bit. One of the most exciting things in Canadian sailing as a fan right now is certainly the women's FX. Who's going to qualify for the women's FX class? It's very exciting, and I don't know if you want to weigh in, John.
Sure, I have to, right? You know what? You have two very strong teams. The Llewellyn Lafrances, they're doing great and they're coming on. And but at the end of the day, I would almost I'll fall back to the easy answer. I look at when Frank and I were competing at the Olympics. All of the countries have very, very good sailors on all of the boats. But at the end of the day, it's the best team. And so we'll see what happens between the two sets of the Lafrances and Llewellyn Lafrances and Ali and Mariah, and that they're both going to be feeling a lot of pressure, and it's going to be the team that can sort of that can do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's going to be it's fun to watch either way. To be honest, the fact that my daughter went to the Olympics, that was a fantastic thing. As Frank mentioned about what his father felt. For me, it's exactly the same thing. So this is just a great ride, and it's already grossly exceeded my expectations. So it's all extra as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I got to say on that point too, like having both my Olympic crew having their daughters sailing together. I mean, I felt like the proud uncle kind of thing when like, watching them sail together, and I just absolutely love that too. So proud of them, and I hope they can do it again. But they're not going to have any regrets. I think whatever happens.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
the whole experience to date has been so great, and it's been a mix of of similar to us. They've had some real ups, some real downs, but I think they'd both say that regardless of the outcome, it's been totally worth it. And the traveling they've done, I mean, I'm really envious. We never did nearly as much as traveling as they're doing now, and so I think it's all in all, it's just been a great experience for them.
Oh, that's great. I would want to. I really, literally could talk to you guys for another hour and a half, but I won't. I would like you to maybe give me any thoughts you might have, advice for younger people getting into the sport, or people who really want to improve, like advice towards for sailing, for racing and improving and moving forward in the sport.
Well, first of all, I think it's the best sport ever. I mean, it's such an unbelievable sport. It's so unique. I don't know how many sports there are where you can just the sheer act of doing it is just such a great feeling and so much fun that you could do a lot worse in terms of choosing sailing as a sport to, and you get to go to amazing places, and most you get your issues with people, but most of the international sailing community are great people, and we have friends all over the world from having done it. And I just think, I think it's boat time. I think the number one thing is boat time. Like, I mean, I think we spent so much time in boats when we were young and developing. And I think the two things are just, you got to do it a lot. You got to spend a lot of time. So it's everything's second nature in terms of trying to make the boat go through the water. You could close your eyes and go pretty much just as fast as you can with your eyes open. And just finding people you can work with, and like training partners, and trying to find other good competitors to get into fleets that are competitive, where you got to push yourself. It's no good being the best person in a fleet and winning all the time. You got to be sailing against people that are going to make you really work for it, and force you to get better.
John?
Well, the whole thing is just trying sail with someone who's better than you, so you can learn from them. But it is a really unique sport where you can go race against professionals, and you can just show up on the race course if you have if you happen to be in the right spot. But I think the other thing is, sailors are usually really open. So if you're trying to learn, ask, just ask people, and usually they'll always give you their advice, and some of the time, most of the time, hopefully it's the right advice, but they'll always talk to you, and I think if you talk to enough people, you can learn a lot. And that's the great thing about the sport, is that you can do it your whole life, and I just got back from a Mitchell's regatta in Miami, and here I am, an old guy, and I'm still getting to race against people, and so it's something that you can enjoy no matter how old you are.
You sort of got to be like a sponge when he said, asking people if somebody's really fast, like either ask them, or if they won't tell you, take a good close look at what they're doing and how they have their boat set up, and try to figure it out, and don't be afraid to copy what people who are going fast are doing. Copy it, and then you maybe hopefully someday will improve on it. But I think just picking up those little things, and then they all accumulate, and then suddenly you're a lot better and faster than you were. But you got to pay attention, and you got to work hard at it.
Excellent. Frank McLaughlin, John Millen, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So that'll do it for the end of Season 1 of the Whitecap. Season 2 is coming up. So next time on your water, remember to have fun, make friends, and sail fast.